Hello again, everybody. This is the Catholic Esquire. I know many of you already read about the sacrilege that occurred at St. Patrick's Cathedral, the cathedral that the pastor of the cathedral even called America's parish. I'm sure many of you have heard about the sacrilege and the blasphemies that occurred in St. Patrick's a few days back, where the transsexual Cecilia person, who was a man and claims to be a woman, poster child for that movement, very popular, well known, has died, and they held and were allowed to hold a funeral service in the cathedral. And naturally, the building filled up with a bunch of craziness, insanity, freaks. Uh, it turned into a complete circus, as you would imagine. And what's even more awful about it is it was presided over by a Catholic priest, who not only allowed this event to take place, but made jokes about it, talking about how this is the most he's ever seen that building filled up before. He suggested that the Cecilia person was in heaven. Very common. You're going to hear that at every Novus Ordo Mass, but in this particular case, it's even more outrageous because the Cecilia person is a well-known atheist. And to suggest that an atheist, someone who denies not only Jesus Christ, but that God even exists, is now in heaven and sharing the beatific vision, just adds another layer of debauchery and evil to what happened in that building. Now, what I want to talk about today is not so much that event. If you want the details on exactly what happened, how awful it truly was, check out the article from LifeSite News. I posted to it in the description to this video. You can get the full details there. You'll also see an interesting follow-up piece of the story where someone had actually talked to Cardinal Dolan, the cardinal who's in charge of this basilica, who suggested that they were going to do a mass of reparation. However, it probably was already done, and they wanted to keep it on the down low because they didn't want to excite any of the protesters. Oh my goodness, you guys, we're dealing here with not something that is not the Catholic Church. This is not the faith of my grandparents, my great-grandparents, my ancestors, and not yours, assuming they were Catholic. We're dealing with a whole new entity here. You really have to wonder whether these people believe in God at all. I think about that all the time. But they certainly are interested in changing and replacing the Catholic Church with something else. Now, many people pointed to Fiducia Supplicans, that official document that was issued a few weeks back, approving of blessings for disordered people who are in a relationship. But I suggest that it's not appropriate to point to Fiducia Supplicans in this case. I think you're actually letting these people off the hook by doing that. And it's not really, in this case, relevant. What is relevant is the Second Vatican Council. And that's where a lot of people, including traditionalists, are afraid to go. I'm not afraid to go there. And I want to talk to you about that because it's very, very important. You see, this is more than bad things that are occurring, happenstance in the last couple of years. This is becoming institutional. It was made formal at the Second Vatican Council. And you're going to say, well, nothing in the Second Vatican Council would have ever approved of such blasphemies and sacrilege that we saw at St. Patrick's. But I want to point to the documents. One document in particular, Sacrosanctum Concilium, where you can see a priest who is in charge of a church building, even a beautiful church building like the Basilica, St. Patrick's, can read the Second Vatican Council and say, what we're doing here, what we're doing by having a funeral for this atheist with sacrilege and blasphemy, even if we don't approve of that, by inviting these people in here, knowing full well something like this would almost certainly happen, The council approved it. So real quickly, let's just take a look at Sacrosanctum Concilium. Okay, I'm at the Vatican website. You can see Sacrosanctum Concilium. This is one of the 4 constitutions of the Second Vatican Council. And real briefly, let's go to paragraph 19. I want to show you this. Paragraph 19, Vatican II. With zeal and patience, pastors of souls must promote the liturgical instruction of the faithful and also have their active participation in the liturgy, both internally and externally, taking into account their age and condition, their way of life, and standard of religious culture. By doing so, pastors will be filling one of the chief duties of a faithful dispenser of the mysteries of God, and in this matter they must lead their flock not only in word, but also in example. So what's this paragraph saying? They're saying we want more participation by lay people. That's a problem in itself. And then they say, but you have to take, this participation must take into account their age and condition, their way of life. Well, what kind of way of life is that? Now, if you talk to someone who lives this alternate lifestyle, they're going to tell you that's their way of life. Remember, these people don't think what they're doing is sinful. That's their way of life, and they want to be recognized for it. And the Second Vatican Council document here basically gives permission to the priests to recognize that. Because they're claiming it's their way of life. Let's move on just a little bit down to paragraph 37. And notice this is under a heading called Norms for Adapting the Liturgy to the Culture and Traditions of the People. Why would we do that? Why would we adapt liturgy to the culture and traditions of people? Why? We are worshiping God. God taught us through the Holy Ghost over the centuries, through holy tradition, how he wants to be worshiped. Why are we changing liturgy to conform to the traditions of the people if it's not to appease the people we're trying to conform the liturgy to? But even here, you read this entire section from paragraph 37 to 38, and it talks about provision shall also be made when revising liturgical books for legitimate variations and adaptations to different groups, regions, and peoples, especially in missions lands, provided that the substantial unity of the Roman Rite is preserved, and this should be borne in mind when drawing up the rites and rubrics. Keep in mind, they'll tell you what happened at St. Patrick's was not a mass, so they're not necessarily changing anything to the rubrics here. What they're allowing is a desecration of the building itself. And that's completely, so long as the priest apparently, in his humble opinion, believes it conforms with what the church allows, particularly Vatican II, is acceptable. This is the language the Vatican II uses to allow these things. I just wanted to show you in the document themselves how a modernist may justify such outrage and sacrilege. What this quick little example shows is that you don't need council document to say, we specifically hereby approve that you can have a funeral service for these types of people who engage in such activities, regardless of their activities in the building. You don't need that. You only need a statement like the ones I just showed you that says we need to open up our rights, essentially our facilities, because that's where these practices take place, and adapt them to the way of life of the people. And so you can see that this is completely in line with both the text of Vatican II and the spirit of Vatican II. Because quite frankly, why else would it be in there? Why would a statement like that be in there? if it wasn't to open the door for those sorts of things. Now, do I think the Council Fathers sat there and anticipated what happened at St. Patrick's Cathedral would happen? Could they ever imagine such an awful, horrible thing? No, probably not. But do I think many of the modernists, the theologians, the Protestants, the atheists who were very much in the background and the behind the scenes of the Second Vatican Council that pushed these types of reforms through, do I think they had in mind these types of events? You bet I do. You bet I do. Because you wouldn't write a document that way if you didn't. And sadly, I'm sure many bishops got bamboozled by it because no one would ever think we'd get to this point. Thank you for listening, my friends. If this video is useful or helpful, please share it. Subscribe to the channel. That's really important and helpful. And please keep in mind, the reason I talk about this stuff is because I'm trying to help people get their heads and minds wrapped around what we can see in the church is a crisis. We have a crisis in the church. And that's why you see groups and organizations and people like myself being very critical of those in the hierarchy, because we have a divorce between the authority of the church and the faith. And that's what I'm trying to show and prove to you over and over through these videos. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful day.